Alright, quick show of hands. Who likes microtransactions? Yeah, nobody. That's kind of what we thought. So there's probably not a whole lot that's more controversial in gaming right now than microtransactions. Kind of a hot button topic, which is the practice, if you're not familiar with microtransactions, by the way, of charging players typically like small amounts of money for virtual goods. Now, while microtransactions are par for the course for a lot of smartphone games and have been for a while, they've also been popping up more and more over the years on more traditional console and PC games, initially in free-to-play games and now these days in full retail games too. Like these days, you can buy everything from Pokeballs to soccer players, all through the magic of microtransactions. And like them or hate them, microtransactions are kind of a fact of gaming life now, and they're probably not going anywhere. In 2012, EA Vice President Peter Moore said that within 5 to 10 years, all games are going to use microtransactions. And while that hasn't happened yet, games ranging from Pokemon Go to FIFA have shown that microtransactions do bring in the big bucks. While gamers might not be willing to pay $10 upfront for a game like Super Mario Run, they are more than happy to pay $1 a bunch of times in games like Fire Emblem Heroes, which has made more money than Super Mario Run even if it's been downloaded 10 times fewer. But how did microtransactions actually get started? Because they had to come from somewhere, right? Why are they so prevalent now? Join us as we look back on the history of the teeny tiny payments that grew into a multi-billion-dollar business. Believe it or not, microtransactions have been around almost since the beginning of video games. And no, we're not talking about the original NES. Further back than that, gaming goes way, way beyond the NES. Arcade machines have always funded their games through small investments from players, which anyone who went to an arcade in the 80s with a pocket full of quarters can tell you. And as Eurogamer has reminded us, arcade machines have a history that actually goes back to the mid-1800s when people played penny arcade machines, hence the name of the webcomic. Those games ranged from non-electric pinball machines to slots, fortune tellers, love testers, coin-operated shooter games, and many more. It was the penny arcade that ultimately led to the creation of video game arcades in the 1970s. And it was in the late 70s that really kicked the era of arcade games into high gear. That era began with games like Space Invaders in 1978 and got even bigger with Pac-Man and Centipede in the 1980s. But alongside arcades came the growth of home video game consoles, which also started in the late 70s with systems like the Atari, the Intellivision, and many more. Arcades would chug along one quarter at a time until the industry went through a pretty significant slump in the mid-90s. As graphics on home consoles finally caught up to those in arcade machines, a lot of gamers preferred to just stay home, and attendance at arcades plunged. As home consoles flourished and arcades faded into the background, although never have completely gone away, the idea of how much a game costs changed. Players got used to the idea of spending a larger amount of money up front for their games. It became a fact of life that gamers would get the full game for around $50 to $60 or sometimes more, but that was the general ballpark. But as time went on, developers realized they could make more money off players by charging them little bits of real-world money for in-game items or even to unlock parts of the game or to add on new bits of game. It's hard to pin down any one game that kicked off the current era of microtransactions. Korean MMOs, for example, have been free to play for many years and utilized microtransactions for just as long. Other MMOs, like EverQuest, introduced micropayments to buy things like armor and potions as they got further into its life cycle. In fact, most MMOs have now adopted a model that deals more in micropayments than subscriptions, since those have largely fallen out of fashion. One of the major influences for the mainstreaming of microtransactions in traditional games, though, are freemium titles in the MOBA genre, which has grown increasingly popular in recent years. League of Legends, which released in 2009, is one notable example that traded in a price tag in exchange for smaller transactions, which gradually acclimated players to the idea of spending a little at a time as an acceptable purchasing model. Other MOBA games, like Dota 2, followed, making the practice even more common. While this was happening with PC games, mobile was also exploding with free-to-play games like Candy Crush Saga, which allows players to pay for more lives or for additional abilities to get past tough stages. Now, often, these days, microtransactions are used by developers to give gamers a bit of a shortcut to acquire items they might have otherwise obtained through simply playing the game. Where microtransactions get controversial with gamers, though, is when they're used to unlock content that some think should have been included in the game in the first place, because it leads to situations where a developer might cut out parts of the full game in order to charge extra money for them. Maybe the most notorious example of this was Capcom's Street Fighter X Tekken in 2012, which had a dozen new players, but you had to pay up before accessing them. This was met with widespread disdain from gamers who felt like they were frankly getting kinda ripped off. Another example of microtransactions that was pretty hated by players came in 2013 with the release of Dead Space 3, which included microtransactions as part of its weapon crafting system. While you could scavenge for upgrade materials in the game, you could also just pay money up front and get a better weapon. At the time, Dead Space 3 producer John Calhoun defended the practice, saying, "There's a lot of players out there, especially players coming from mobile games, who are accustomed to microtransactions. They're like, I need this now, I want this now. They need instant gratification." Microtransactions were also seen in Mass Effect 3, which enabled gamers to buy reinforcement packs for the game's multiplayer portion. Assassin's Creed 3 had a similar system. Meanwhile, Gears of War 3 charged up to $45 to unlock all its weapon skins and $30 for a season pass for all of its upcoming DLC packs. Now, microtransactions can range from the absurd to the outrageously expensive. Now, on the silly side, there was the infamous horse armor in Oblivion. On the expensive side, people have paid boatloads of money to buy the best players in a FIFA Ultimate Team mode. In For Honor, which released earlier this year, one user on Reddit discovered it would cost $732 to unlock everything in the game. That sparked a pretty huge outrage from the player base, and developer Ubisoft responded, saying that you weren't actually meant to unlock everything in the game. But a lot of people were still left feeling like, at this point, microtransactions had gone too far. And then there were the trading card games like Hearthstone, in which you can obtain cards for free, but it's a lot quicker to just buy them with real money. Plus, its developer Blizzard keeps coming out with new expansions every few months, which means that some players then feel pressured to buy even more packs just to keep up with the times. Then, of course, there are, well, not microtransactions so much, but season passes and map packs for games like Battlefield 1 and Star Wars Battlefront. Now, if there's a way to get an extra few bucks here and there, publishers, they're looking into it. While they're pretty controversial among gamers, it's not hard to see why video game companies love microtransactions, because they let them make much more money off a gamer than just a base $60 purchase. Last year, it was reported that EA makes about $650 million per year in just the Ultimate Team modes for its FIFA, Madden, and NHL franchises. All of this leads to a common response from players that too many games are becoming what they call pay to win, meaning that you have no chance of competing in the top echelons if you're not paying out real money. And that's the ultimate issue with microtransactions. At their best, they give you a little something extra for a few bucks that you're willing to part with, hopefully something that's cosmetic that doesn't actually affect the gameplay. At their worst, microtransactions make you feel like you have to pay more to get the full version of the game that should have been included to begin with. What do you think about microtransactions? They're pretty much here to stay, unfortunately, so it would be nice if developers can find the best possible ways to implement them that don't negatively impact the experience for players. Are there any examples of games you feel do it well that other developers should be emulating? Let us know in the comments. And to make sure you get the best of everything in video games, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Know.
Fine path of beauty is my inspiration. Within me lies the power to unite and destroy. Follow my path.